I never knew who my parents were. My mother birthed me, gave me my knives as a parting gift, and then handed me over to the state. Nothing odd in that, just the way my people do things. I was raised nameless, just another armed toddler in the creche. But I was always a little different from the others, more inquisitive. The Minders looked after all of us and tried to love us all the same, but having this aberrant child who followed them around asking questions over playing with the other kids made that all sorts of awkward for them. I didn't fit with their model of how a child should act, but they wanted to help us all be individuals, and they tried to see to my needs as best they could. That's why we don't have names at first. We all get given these blunt little knives when we're born, and as we grow and change, they take a little of our power and grow with us. When the magic starts to show in our swords, we get to pick our own names, both for us and our blades. We choose our own identity and go out to forge our own path in the world. I called myself Sarazen, and my swords were Savior and Slayer. I was into all that moral crap back then. I hooked up with a trade caravan and went wandering pretty early in my life, but it didn't take long for me to hit the hatred. People spit at me. They called me half-breed, demon blood, and witch elf. They thought I was a sorcerer and a psychopath, that I must speak with demons because of my heritage. I turned right around and went home again.
When I was very young, I found an old diary left by one of my ancestors. I opened the book to the scent of alchemy and a story of elves, tall, deformed creatures which came to our lands to hunt. Unlike my family, who hunted deer, elves came to hunt people. The pages told of a family not unlike my own. As the paladins arrived with columns of maddened mages in chains, they fled into the very cellar in which I found the diary. That family huddled together in the cellar as the two groups fought outside. I realized how close I had come to dying that day before I had ever lived, as without that family I would never have come to be. Mom and Dad tried to reassure me. They were warm and kind as always, but my young self couldn't grasp the length of an era or how the world had changed in more than 2 millennia since the diary was written. I was fixated on the diary for weeks, and when Dad spoke of the alliances we'd forged with the elves, it only made matters worse. I was shocked that we'd let these monsters into our lands. I thought about the tree of ancestors, all of who were needed to make me. 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. If any of them had been taken too soon, then I would not have been. So young, I felt the crushing weight of fate, and despaired of how little control I'd had of my own being.
Albinos like me are not well trusted within the Lokoth, and having an imaginative name like Grayscale didn't help. My mother raised me alone. We had to look after each other, and that meant I grew up strong and fast. Those strangers kept me at a distance. Those who knew me always found respect, and I had the support of those around me when I decided to enlist in the Savage Guard, to follow in the footsteps of my late father in the Emperor's personal force. The training was particularly harsh, as the stigma of my scales caught up with me. The rest of the guild looked down on me from the start. Guild training is a strange process. We were made to sit and chant, while a teacher chanted in dissonance with us and burned incense. The process planted knowledge deep within us. Later, that knowledge would unlock, given the right experiences. When I made apprentice, I was given as punishment to a disgraced master who had shamed the Emperor. He had been accused of leaking information to rogue members of the Turuku tribe, and the case had ended without resolution. 2 outcasts together, we drove each other to do our best, and slowly I built a strong reputation for myself as he rebuilt his. As we sparred together and fought together on the front lines with the enemies of the Lokoth, the knowledge planted deep within my mind began to unlock. Suddenly being able to read was jarring. I found myself using my right hand to do things as often as my left. I found I knew things of our enemies, our history, and the surface world that I had never seen.
My first memory is of my parents getting killed. My mother standing with her back against the door, desperation in her eyes as they try to force their way in. The thumping, louder and louder against the door. My father trying to climb from a window with me in his arms. A moment of silence. An arrowhead protruding from my mother's chest. Her face turns away from me as the door opens with her pinned to it. My father cries out. He does his best to put me on the windowsill as he unholsters his flail and steps back into the room.
Stay here, Einan.
He says. I try to follow him and fall. I wake up in the grass that I landed in, flames all around me. I find my father's body, head missing, and riddled with arrows. I ran away from the fires, towards the city, not really looking where I was going, and straight into the arms of a bearded soldier. He told me I was safe and shushed me as I burst into tears. His name was Runtherd. He'd seen the burning inn from his post on the walls of the city Mirionen. I was the only survivor, and he took me in. Runtherd helped me figure out a bit of who my parents were from what I said. They were probably deep elf officers, running from the army, an army that don't like deserters. And that was probably why the inn was burned. Humans don't live long, and Runtherd died when I was still young. I decided I'd one day join the army of Mirionen to carry on his good work.
Immortality. That was the word the miners had promised us all, but the word they really meant was agelessness. Just that we'd stop growing when we got to adults. Forever young, but still mortal. A careful Githeri could theoretically live forever, right? But what good was theory when a stray rock could still kill you in the end? If I was going to forge my own road through life, I couldn't have concerns like that deciding where my road might go. I sulked for a bit, sure, but soon I set out on my own again. I had a new attitude. I knew my reputation with people couldn't get lower than where it started, so I didn't bother trying real hard to preserve it. I also had a new goal, true immortality. If anyone's cursed blood had the darkness there to do it, it was ours. Even had a bet going with my friend Radiant on who could get it first. I traveled around for a bit before I got the details on the Warlocks of Morndrak. Massive library dedicated to demonology, shadowy agenda, and a reputation for amorous experimentation. They were just the sort of cliches I was looking for, and I traveled damn near halfway around the globe to get to them. But when I got to the gleaming fortress of Morndrak, the Warlocks didn't hold my attention for long.
I was older when the visions started. I still remember the first one as if it was yesterday. I stood as a tall lady clad in armor. Attendants waited on my word all around me, and dried tears clung to my face as I stared up at a colossal storm in the distance. I took out a small ornate copper box from my pocket and opened a secret compartment. Within were framed two masterwork portraits, one of a man and the other a child.
"Your orders, Lady Gisela?"
inquired one attendant. I put the box away and glanced up at the sky before declaring,
"We ride for the storm!"
in a voice not my own. I told Dad about the dream the next morning as we prepared our crossbows for the hunt.
Thoria,
He assured me.
you probably just heard the tale of Lady Gisela with the cornavira in the market yesterday. These things can get into your dreams that way.
His smile was fake. Mum and Dad argued that night, and every week or so I'd have another vision. I had to know if the places in my visions were real, and when I saw the fortress city of Voron there, a place that was close but I'd never been, I knew I could find out. Dad had a man who came from the city every now and then. He managed our relationships with the nobles who traded shares in our business. He'd stay the night and set out just before dawn. Dad would see him off and then wake me for work. I left a note in my room and then hid in the chassis under his wagon, off to the city for answers.
I struggled with my feelings after Runtherd died, and went to the Guild of Berserkers for training. They taught me how to store my grief and rage, to channel it when the fighting started, use it as a weapon. I also mastered the tools of my deep elf heritage, the flail, and the astral magic forged into us by the spellweaver Elwick. Mirionen changed around me as I trained. Its hero king was dead, and his son locked away in mourning. So the soldiers got to being guards full time, watching over the city and its people until the prince felt ready to rule. It takes a long time to guild train an elf, and I expected to join an army in full swing, active under a new king, but the years dragged on, and his majesty remained hidden from the world. Eventually, I was apprenticed to a wood elf named Siora Malwyn, or just Siora for short.
Einen's a pretty name.
He asked me.
What's it short for?
I told him honest that I didn't know, as I could only remember my father speaking the short form just the once. Siora and we embodied the ideals of Mirianan. The deep elves always blamed the surface elves for being trapped in the underworld. But in the City of Unity, even such enemies could work together.
At the pinnacle of my master's redemption, he thanked me for bringing him hope, and took revenge on the one who accused him in the first place. I cried out for the innocence of my master. I pleaded that he must have acted in self-defense, but it was no use. They declared that the second breach of honor proved the first, and he was executed, with fresh doubts placed on my own honor. As the guild debated what to do with me, I was approached by another albino named Pallid, from a traveling Urukul Theta group. She still believed in my honor, and together we left the Lokoth and headed to Mirianan, where we hoped to build a life free of the prejudices of our own kin. To the eyes of Mirianan, we were just a couple of regular Lokoth, and when we started with our good work, they welcomed us with open arms. Pallid began acting on the streets of the palace and trade districts of the city. We took from her earnings the bare minimum to live, and I found a particularly needy area of slum in the Cathedral District to begin distributing the rest. The banner of charity attracted a bountiful audience from the nobles and merchants, as well as plenty of volunteers to help both Pallid and I. I went to meet Pallid after a performance one evening, and found her talking to Lord Esther Brashak, the daughter of the city's wealthiest banker. Pallid and I explained our business to Esther, hoping for a wealthy backer to boost our enterprise. But when we were finished with our explanation, she told us that the greed and impatience of mortals would doom our plans to failure.
You can't change the city this way. Your efforts will end in bloodshed, and neither of you have the strength to enforce your policy, even if you decided to make that sacrifice.
We dismissed her words as those of a spoiled halfling, looking for an excuse not to give.
We reached the fortress city of Voron, seat of the human rulership and a relic from the dawn of the world, preserved by feats of maintenance and alchemy. I slipped from the bottom of the wagon as it sat in traffic and, deciding that I'd recognize the gate we came through from a vision if I had a better look at it, began to walk back the way we'd come. I didn't get to sneak around for long. Members of the People's Militia Guard quickly took me for a lost child and confronted me. I just wanted to see the city, I pleaded. I was too honest. They weren't going to let a runaway adolescent roam free. For the next hour or so I sat in a dimly lit room in a PMG barracks as the guards came and went. I told them where I'd come from, but for a long time nobody spoke to me after that.
She's about the right age.
The voice belonged to one of the guards who'd brought me in.
Might be worth a look.
The door opened, and the guard entered with two men in plate armor, their helmets removed.
She's a bit of a pug,
said one.
You called us in for this?
Might as well test her anyway,
said the other.
We've come all the way over here now.
The second man walked over to me and offered me a silk pouch. I opened it and took out the copper box from my first vision. My heart raced as I turned the box in my hands and looked it over. It was more scuffed in places and had some little dents in it, but there was no doubting it was the very same box. I was hit with the revelation that my visions were real. I knew that if I simply handed the box back and pretended that I'd never seen it, that I could go back to my family on the ranch and life would go back to normal. Doing anything else led to the unknown. In my panic, I hesitated for too long and the decision was made for me.
I think she recognizes it.
There was no going back now. I opened the secret compartment and showed them in the frames where the two portraits had once been.
That's that then,
said the first man.
We have finally found her.
Being a berserker is about more than just battle. We pack away our negative emotions and don't let them out until the fighting kicks off. That makes us calm and cool in every other situation. Each berserker shuts away a different amount of those feelings. But when I joined the guild, they were crushing me. I wanted them all gone. And as I moved through apprenticeship, my training took the lot. I stopped feeling sadness, anger, fear, worry, regret. I lost it all. The berserkers are oft called in to help in scenarios where other folk find clear thinking difficult. And because of the hate in our heritage, the guild liked to use Siora and I as mediators. It was supposed to be symbolic, I think. We were helping to fix an issue between two nobles, because when a landslide outside the city, it moved the borders between their lands. We took a break, and I was grabbed by an elven woman with a flail and a bow, a guest of one of the nobles.
Einenlius,
She said. My heart skipped a beat. That was my full name?
The court of the Blue Flame had you spared. When your parents defected, we argued that you were too young to have a choice in the matter. No more complicit in the crime than any other hostage.
My thoughts were a whirlwind. My guild training stripped me of whatever I was supposed to actually feel, and left me stumbling for words.
You owe us your life,
she said as she slipped back into the crowd. I couldn't get close to her after that. When I told Siora about what happened, he just smirked.
Getting wrapped up in politics was bound to happen sooner or later. Let's just hope it brings a way for us to do good.
Owing favors to your master's enemies is never good.
Operation expanded and things started to fall apart. Demands for aid came in from across the city, and we expanded our reach. But those we were helping already accused me of spreading our aid too thin. Everyone saw us giving, and everyone wanted us to give more. Some of my aides were caught stealing the supplies they were supposed to be distributing. Some people accused me of keeping too much for myself, while Paladin and I were down to just one meal per day. One day I was approached by a large gang of thugs. A lot of them weren't what I'd call poor, and none of them were starving. They accused me of neglecting the needs of our group, and threatened that they'd end our operation if we didn't pay what they thought we owed. I stood up for what I knew was right, and refused their demands. They backed down and walked away. I may never have finished my training, but for them I was just a little too close to guild training for them to take off. They moved across the city as a dispersed group, going through the gates as tiny pairs, triplets, but the guards wouldn't stop. Assembled again in the trade district where Pallid was performing, then stormed the show. They killed Pallid, several of our volunteers, and even some people in the audience before the army got involved. Most of the attackers were killed. Esther Breshek was right. To achieve our goals with the methods we used required moral compromise and the ending of souls. My unswerving moral compass had gotten a lot of people killed, and those who depended on us would have to learn to do without again. I fled back to Verutal, the homeland of the Lakoth.
In my search for knowledge, I'd always practiced my sixth sense above all else. I felt the flow of the ether better than anyone I knew. I could tell the dark knights that stood watching the halls of Morndrock like statues had their minds sealed away, but they seemed to have found the immortality I was looking for. I worked my way into the libraries of the Warlocks and tried to find out everything I could about how the Dark Knights were made. Their black armor was iron infused with corrupted ether drawn from the demon world of Lyrian, but it was a far cry from the true shade metal of that world. The armor sealed the soul inside of it, keeping the wearer alive as long as they wore it, but it also doomed them if they took it off, and by the same token, that soul's will was bound to the one who hexed the armor. Those two functions seemed inseparable. I wanted immortality, but I wasn't willing to trade my mind for it. I was about to give up on the Dark Knights when I saw their guildmaster put down a rebellion single-handedly. His wounds closed as fast as they were opened. He wielded forces like I'd never seen. His soul burned brightly to my sixth sense, and most importantly, his mind was his own. I went back to the libraries and carried on my research. It seemed that the helmet was important. This guildmaster, who called himself Dread, didn't wear one. I'd seen other Dark Knights without helmets in the taverns of Morndrock, shouting of the wonders of being a Dark Knight, and the pleasures of their private section of the city, but I could feel little motes of life energy leaking out of them, and a book confirmed that their memories were fabricated when they removed the helmet. So what good was free will if my memories were stolen and my mind rewritten to fill the agenda of another? Weeks of searching later, and I had it. Mental dominion of a Dark Knight requires full encapsulation. If I never wore the helmet, they couldn't control me or rewire my mind. That was what made Dredd different. He never had a helmet. He had found true immortality. There was only one thing left to do. I joined the Dark Knights.